Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 105. The lofty topic is truth versus disinformation in the age of generative AI. Quick reminder, if you want to support the live stream, please follow us on LinkedIn. Our guest today is Harrison Tang, co-founder and CEO of Spokio. And our co-guest today is Joe Andrew, Requirements Engineer for Digital Identity System. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Hey, hello, everyone, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So before we dive in, your first time Identity guest, so we're going to do a quick round of introductions. Harrison, why don't we start with you? How did you get here?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. So I'm Harrison Tang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spokio. Spokio is one of the biggest people search identity verification service that aggregates about 20 billion records and resolve them into about 600 million person entities to help about 15 million users a month to search, connect, verify, and know who they're dealing with. I also serve as the co-chair of W3C Credentials Communities Group, which is one of the biggest decentralized self-sovereign identity communities out there. And I think Joe is actually one of my predecessors. So very glad to be here.
And maybe a good segue. So Joe, what's your background? How did you end up in identity?
Sure. Well, I'm the founder and president of Legendary Requirements. We're a small consultancy. I got started as a software engineer and entrepreneur in the dot-com heyday, and basically, built out a bunch of interesting systems, including a few shots at my own startup. And I got involved in decentralized identity 20 years ago at the second IIW. And since then, I've been heavily involved in the W3C standards for both decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. And I've been in the leadership of rebooting the Web of Trust. Right now, my passion project is the Digital Fiduciary Initiative, which is trying to create a new professional class of people who are ethically, morally, and legally empowered to deal with identity issues.
Interesting. Okay. So let me, I'm going to put the banner on, and I want to start with the background question. I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Harrison. Can you tell us what are the differences between misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation? My wife and I were having guesses about malinformation. And I want to check to see if our guesses align with your definitions.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, first of all, you can think of it as a 2x2 matrix, right? So the first dimension is whether it is true, whether it's truth or not. And we can talk about what truth is. And that's a much difficult conversation. And the second dimension is actually the intent. Do you intend to share for harm, right? Use this information, leverage this information for harm or not? And misinformation is basically information that's wrong, but then but then it's shared regardless of intent. So you can be sharing with a good intent, but information is wrong. That's misinformation. Malinformation is correct information, but leverage to do harm. And disinformation is worse, right? It's wrong information generated just to do harm. So disinformation is the worst one. Yeah.
All right, let me see if I got this straight. Misinformation is wrong information, but there's no bad intent. Is that right?
It's correct information, but there is, but regardless of the intent. And malinformation is correct information, but with a malintent. And disinformation is wrong information with malintent.
Yeah. Okay. So misinformation you said it's correct information. Then what makes it misinformation?
So first of all, this is a much tougher question because we need to talk about what truth is. And and my personal belief using physics analogy is that you can never know the full truth. You can only approximate truth. And the reason is because truth is inherently high dimensional and human observation is inherently low dimensional. So what do I mean by that? I think the best example that I have 4 kids, 4 sons. I'm teaching my oldest one about this concept, right? The best one is the globe, the Earth, right? So if you look at the 2D map, one thing a lot of people don't realize is that Greenland and Russia, while big, is not as big as people think it is, right? And Africa is actually much bigger than it looks. And the reason is because in the North Pole, South Pole is a dot. It's actually not a line. So when you actually project a three-dimensional object into a two-dimensional space,
Yeah.
information gets lost. It gets distorted. So imagine the truth is high dimensional, meaning that say it has, I mean, in language, using large language models, attention mechanism, you're talking about hundreds of thousands, and truth is probably millions of dimensions, right? Temperature can be a dimension. Uh, Humidity can be a dimension. So let's say you have millions of dimensions, but all your eye can see or all your senses can actually observe is like 10 of them. You can only approximate truth, right? You cannot see the full picture. And
Hmm.
that's why truth is a very, very tough thing. And you cannot just say, hey, my observation is truth. By definition, one observation is subjective, right? That's why in statistics, you need law of large numbers to make it objective. You need multiple observations to approximate truth. And I think fundamentally, that's why it's very, very hard to see the full truth. In fact, impossible. But what we can do is use multiple criteria to approximate it.
Hmm. Joe, I'm just going to let you respond to that if you want to, or we could move on to the next deep topic. We've never discussed the meaning of truth before in this live stream. So this is a new existential
Sure.
bar that we're going to have to reach for future episodes.
I love it. I'm 100% in agreement with Harrison, and I think this notion of the limits of perception is also useful for understanding what to do in the computational context. Like, we know that the mind only perceives symbols that it generates based on sensory input, and we know that all of our senses can be fooled. So you can't even actually perceive reality through your own senses. Like, we know this physiologically, psychologically. And I think that applies also in these digital systems. The only truth they can possibly even understand is something that is represented in their system. And so, since that mechanism can always be hacked or could be in error, you have to build meta systems around it to try and understand, well, what is true enough for me to work with? And in fact, I think the most interesting forms of truth in society are outcomes from processes. So the legal system has a process by which the court in a given case will decide what is true in this case. And if they decide for this particular case 2 + 2 = 5 because there's some calculation, then that is the truth for that case. And science, has its own process, and it's, tentative because we can always challenge some scientific discovery. Blockchain creates a certain notion of truth and immutability because of process. So I think the question for us in this age of AI and truth is, what are the processes that can give us enough confidence that the party we're working with is a party we think we're working with?
Okay, well, let's pivot to disinformation then. So disinformation, let's just go over this again. So I've already forgotten. This is information that is correct, but used for bad intent.
It's wrong information used for bad intent. Yeah.
I thought that's malinformation.
Malinformation is correct information used for bad
Okay,
intent.
disinformation. Okay, so it's funny because misinformation is just information that doesn't display the whole picture. So malinformation is, you said it's um, correct information used for bad intent,
Yes. But then the problem
and
is, what is
disinformation
correctness? Yeah.
is wrong information. Okay, so let's focus on disinformation. So wrong information used for bad intent. So this sounds like generative AI trying to um, hack an authentication. I'm logging in as a person, or I'm trying to do electronic KYC and getting video interviewed, but I'm a hacker who's doing a real time animation trying to impersonate Joe, and I'm not really Joe. So would that be disinformation?
Yes, and I think generative AI, very exciting. I love it, by the way. I think it actually one of the unintended consequences is actually makes generating disinformation very, very easy, right? Because you can impersonate a person, you can impersonate a photo, and literally it's just like 1 or 2 clicks away. So it makes it makes this problem a lot harder.
Okay. Joe, just so we're talking about disinformation. Any thoughts about disinformation or challenges that you see? How does generative AI raise challenges for disinformation?
Well, I think Harrison's right about the deep fakes and in multiple different media, right? It's not just text; it's also video and images. Um, so I think AI is just rewriting the game in terms of being able to detect sort of authentic human expression, because AI, LLMs in particular, are really good at putting words together that feel like a human put them together. And so that just makes it really easy to see a phrase that you're like, oh, that's really truthy. That feels right. Um, but it's not because a human figured it out. Before LLMs, the kind of scams or hacks we might get, like phishing emails, it was easy to spot the grammatical errors from someone whose first language isn't English. And you're like, oh, this totally isn't from Citibank. This isn't, from my government or whatever,
Yeah.
because they would use different language. I've seen those messages. Now that we're in LLMs, the languaging is much easier to fake. And so that, I think, raises all the questions about how do I know any interaction is from the party I think it is.
Yeah, and so we've had 2 episodes on deepfakes here on the live stream, and my conclusion from that is that according to both guests, the best deepfake detection algorithms are 95% effective now for eKYC, which means like average ones are only like 91% effective, um, but only the best ones are 95% effective. What that says to me is basically AI is currently just beating our ability to detect it, and and eKYC is now useless. We actually need to go back to in-person KYC now to really understand if this person is really the person we think they are. Harrison?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, it's always a cat and mouse game, right? So I'm not trying to say that I think detection models and detection algorithms is not important. Actually, I think it's important. I think it's one of the pillars to detect misinformation and disinformation. But that said, it shouldn't be the only pillar. It shouldn't be the only way, because at this moment, yes, I do think generative AI is at this moment better, right, than detection algorithms. So you have to add other mechanisms to solve this problem, such as cryptographic proofs. AI cannot break cryptography, right? It's completely different problems. AI is more of a data modeling discipline, and cryptography is about computational hardness. So AI cannot break cryptography, right? AI cannot solve those kind of issues or break those things. So I think we need to go through basically leverage all the different methods and have a holistic solution.
Right. I saw a funny video about ChatGPT playing chess, and it's funny because at one point it just eliminated the enemy king. It took the enemy king off the board, and I was like, "Yeah, that's one way to win." Like my next move is eliminate the king. um, so you're right. I could see how you're saying it solves certain problems, but it doesn't solve every problem. Um, Joe, any thoughts about other ways? Like if AI detection isn't going to work, what else do we do? Are we screwed?
I don't think we're screwed. I do think we need different architectures. I think the detection is useful, but it's like guardrails on a freeway, highway turn. It's not going to stop the semi from going off the road, but we should build in whatever protections we can, because it does give you some incremental confidence in what you're dealing with. But I think I want to channel something Wayne Chang said today. So Wayne Chang of Spruce ID, it's his software running the California DMV wallet. That AI is really bad at 2 things. showing up in person and breaking cryptography, as Harrison just touched on. And what we're doing in the digital fiduciary work is actually creating something called the fair witness ceremony, where one of the things, the first protocol we're working on is the proof of eligibility to work in the United States, which is an in-person ceremony. So the whole point is a digital fiduciary who's trusted like a lawyer or doctor is in the room physically with the person who is verifying their identity. And you check the documents, you record it, use cryptographic hashes, and you have privacy enabling assertions that we can audit after the fact. And the reason we like this fulcrum is because it's how we've solved decentralized trust with doctors and lawyers and accountants. And it uses these two features that AI just isn't good at showing up in person and pretending to be human.
Harrison, maybe you could talk about some of the other, or get more specific about some of the other detection tools, digital signatures, provenance tracking, education. What are some of the other tools we have at our disposal to try and fight disinformation? So that's what we're limiting ourselves to here, right? Fighting disinformation.
Yeah, I think the kind of echoing what Joe said earlier, AI, more specifically, large language models, right? That's what catch everyone a little bit off guard, right? Like and feels sentient, even though it's not sentient. Large language models is trained on a large body of text, right? So it does not have real connections to the physical world. So I think technologies like authentication, which is basically solving the problem, linking the physical identity to the digital self, right? Biometric authentications, those kind of technologies. In Web3, there's this Oracle problem. In data aggregation, we're mostly leveraging law of large numbers from multiple issuers, right? Multiple issuers' claims, and find coherence, find majority rule, that kind of logic to find truth, right? So I think that's probably the hardest thing for AI to, or sorry, let me be specific, for large language models to actually fake, because it's not anchored on top of physical reality. Like large language models cannot fake biometric authentication. It cannot do that, right? So I think that's probably the most effective one. In philosophy, it's called the criteria of correspondence. Whether a digital claim, whether a claim correspond to physical reality. That's something that I don't think that's probably the most effective one that large language models cannot replicate. Yeah.
Let me just ask an immediate follow-up question here. What are the use cases for this that you see? Um, news is one where I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I can't trust the news because I can't trust, you know, the reporter who wrote it. Is that a real person? The person who tweeted it? Where do you see the solution that you're thinking about? Let's say a Web3 solution. What is the use case to fight disinformation that you're looking at?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, wearing my business hat a little bit, how does all of this tie to revenue? How does it help generate value to the users so that we can increase revenue, right? So first of all, trust increases revenue because if you look at the definition of trust using a game theory, right? Trust is basically interdependence on each other to create a mutually beneficial outcome, right? So that's the definition using game theory, because trust is how you beat the game in repeated game in game theory. So mutually beneficial outcome between the service providers and the users. Trust, whether it's Trustmark, we did a lot of A/B testings about Trustmark. It actually does increase conversion rate, right? Like using a service like PayPal, Apple Pay does increase conversion rate, right? So I think Trustmarks works. It does increase revenue. So the next question is, how do you engender that trust? How do you develop that trust? In data modeling, at the end of the day, it's about signals. In the industry, they call it signals, but really it's just attributes and features that correlates to revenue, right? And I think these things that we are talking about, um, tying it to the truth, right? Because people do value truth, right? Having these kind of signals, and when you do modeling, I do believe that it actually, uh, you know, help generate value to the end users, help people feel more confident about their transactions, and ultimately creates additional values and generate values and money, right, for the service providers and the users alike.
So, Joe, how do you see emerging technologies like self-sovereign identity, Web3, open data shape a more secure online environment that has more trust? Or
Sure.
maybe you don't at
I
all.
think
Maybe
the
you think that none of those things are going to work.
No, it's a great leading question because I do think we can improve the situation. I think the shift is from thinking about, is that a real person? I think that's a misframing of the challenge that we have here, because every action taken by any individual on the internet is done through software. We cannot interact digitally except by clicking on something or using some piece of software unless it is surveilling us with like a camera or something like that. So in general, humans don't interact digitally. We use software to interact. So it's always some software interacting with the system. And to me, the question isn't, is this a real person? Because of course, there's software in between that real person. The question is there an accountable person engaged in this action? And so one of the efforts we should mention here, especially about disinformation, is the CTPA work being led right now by the Creator Assertions Working Group at DIF. And so this is using cryptography to sign media such that as it progresses through the production pipeline, even if it's composited with other pieces of media, you can still at the point of presentation have some provenance that this was recorded by this person on this date, and then it was edited by CNN, and they added this overlay, and all of that can be independently verified. So I can say, oh, I know that photographer, or I trust them because they have a reputation, or, oh, that was CNN, and either I do or do not trust them because I have some notion of CNN's political biases. The challenge with getting to an accountable person, especially in the CTPA, is it has a centralized architecture. To get to market, they basically adopted the CA architecture that DNS uses, an independent one, but nevertheless, it's a root authority with trust registries.
Mhm.
And if you're not in the system, you cannot have photographs that are verifiable. And so that leads to potential opportunities for censorship. So there's this tension between how do I know who it is? And in the way that I find out who the accountable person is there a way for some entity to censor or to intermediate the relationship? That's where I, as a decentralized advocate, I'm like, hey, can we build systems that don't allow the state to interdict my speech? And unfortunately, I think the CTPA gets into that direction because they're using this CA-based architecture.
Yeah, the last thing we need is another PKI. Harrison, do you have any thoughts on the use case that Joe mentioned on creating a media sort of I guess a chain of custody for the media assets to move through from production to publication?
Oh, I definitely support provenance, and no, whether do it through centralized way or decentralized. Obviously, I prefer decentralized, but provenance through cryptography is definitely an important thing because at the end of the day, you don't want people to forge, right, and tamper a trusted document and claim that it's from them, right? So I think having more provenance, like provenance, by the way, just to define it, is basically the 6W, right? The who, what, where, when, how, why of a particular piece of information, right? So having that provenance, history of where the content comes from, how it actually transfer from one person to another, how it's getting transformed through the pipelines, I think definitely engenders trust. Mhm.
Hmm. Um, and Joe, you switched to your your wide angle view.
It is if any watchers know how to stop this behavior in my Logitech capture. I don't know, it just automatically does it. So my apologies for disruption.
So all of these things, whenever I hear web or self-sovereign identity, my first question is always, and what wallet does that go into? Um,
Mhm.
this theory is all very nice, but um, but if we're really talking about fighting disinformation, it would have to happen on a pretty wide scale, and we can have a very elegant solution that is maybe not very deployable. So, Joe, any thoughts about like how close are we today to being able to see maybe some of these theoretical designs being implemented to solve some actual disinformation solution?
So we are seeing some of them solved. You know, I would say early production, like TrueAge, the California DMV wallet I mentioned earlier, um, and other deployments of MDLs, are using this technology under the hood in terms of cryptography, signed assertions, trying to establish identity with digital credentials. And I, frankly, the choices being made in California and Utah are really interesting. California's intention, as I understand it right now, is that their wallet will be able to host other credentials, not from the California DMV. And so the last time I checked, there were 1.6 million people who had downloaded and installed this, and that's the biggest wallet installation I know of for digital credentials in use. Like I don't think the Microsoft Authenticator really counts because I don't think
No.
most people use it that way.
Yeah.
But I think there's a huge opportunity for state-sponsored software to get into the field to be used. And with the EUDI wallet, that is definitely going to be a factor. Like they're still arguing over technical details, so we're not sure which direction it's really going to go. But when that is deployed, you are going to see an entire continent that is focused on how can we share these credentials. And businesses are going to have to figure out, how do I accept the credentials that are issued by the state that I now have to use for like KYC, AML? So I think there's a big driver for the state in terms of enabling the root of this, catch 22 about we need holders, we need verifiers, we need wallets. Like all those have to work together. So I'm I guess positive about the state's role in that.
Well, in the division of labor, the state can do that in-person identification and then share that the associated claims. Um, Harrison, I'm curious about your thoughts about the role of where do you see the role of the wallet in fighting disinformation? Are we going to have to move to wallets? Is that a part of your vision or not a part of your vision at all?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about what wallet is. At the end of the day, wallet is kind of like a account, basically, right? It's basically a key management. Wallet address is essentially a public key, and then
Hmm.
um, the wallet is basically management of your private key and public key pairs effectively, right? So from that more generalized definitions, there can be multiple wallets. It's not just the state issue wallets, right? It's not just Apple Pay, Apple Wallet, Google Wallet, but the browsers can be a wallet. In fact, I know the browser platforms are working at digital credentials APIs and federated credentials management APIs, those kind of initiatives. Effectively, they're acting as a wallet, right, to kind of help intermediate, whether it's sign-ins or other things. So many things can be a wallet. I'm not sure. Uh, I think most people think there will be one wallet that rules them all. I think that could I do think Apple Wallet, Google Wallet is probably going to be the most popular ones. But that said, a lot of things can be a wallet, right? Because we have multiple social network accounts. We have accounts in multiple different things. So from that kind of generalized concept, I think wallets or accounts that start accepting other credentials from issuers and leveraging those credentials to do things. I think that dream is starting to get more and more popular. Imagine it's not just a state issue wallets right now, right? The platforms I know is actively working toward that as well. So I think the self sovereign identity dream, um, while it will take some more years to gain mass adoption, I think is making very positive and faster and faster progress.
All right. So, but just to be explicit, you do see wallets as an essential ingredient in your vision for how we use self-sovereign identity and Web3 to solve this disinformation problem, like connecting it back to disinformation. If disinformation is what we're trying to solve, wallets are somehow involved in this solution, would you say?
So yes, but then not directly, right? Because at the end of the day, what is a wallet, and why is it important for self-sovereign identity? Self-sovereign identity is basically empowering data subjects, right, the holders of the wallets, to intermediate identity transactions. So effectively allowing the data subjects to achieve self-sovereignty. So in self-sovereign identity, the generalized concept of a wallet is critical, because wallet is basically an agent of data subjects of the users, right? So that it's no longer the big platforms or the issuers or even Spokio, right, intermediate identity transactions, but rather it's the users or the data subjects themselves. Now, the disinformation, misinformation, you can solve it in multiple different ways, right? You can solve it through detection, right? Detection algorithms. You can solve it through authentication, the linkage between digital and the physical self. You can solve it through cryptographic provenance. You can solve it through education, right? So governance too, right? Governance, one of the things we didn't really talk about. Governance basically rules and processes and standards that establish trust, right, within the ecosystem. That's a very, very important one too. So there's multiple ways to solve it. How does the self-sovereignty actually help misinformation, disinformation? I think it's through the cryptographic trust, right? The fact that the issues, the claims, the credentials cannot be tampered with. That's where it comes from. Like, for example, imagine an author of an article. Now, you can trust that that author is not impersonated. You can trust that the credentials that other people's claim that this author is very, very good is not tampered with. That's where self-sovereign identity can help solve the misinformation, disinformation. But that said, it's not the only way to solve it. Yeah.
Right. Any thoughts, Joe? Um, I guess, and my
Yeah,
follow-up
initially,
question would be, um,
sure.
sure, self-sovereign maybe could do it, but one of the things that I think about Web3 is that a lot of times Web3 is a way to do it, but there's other feasible cryptographic ways that you could do it that don't involve Web3. And so then the question is, why do we even need Web3? That would be my question, Joe. But any thoughts on, is this decentralized really necessary, or even the best idea?
Sure. So it's interesting. That's a little shift in the question. When you first asked about is a wallet necessary,
Yeah,
my gut reaction was no, but yes. And so it's complicated. I think what the wallet does is it democratizes the ability to make digital assertions, which really allows the opposition to issue verifiable statements even when the central power structures don't want them to. And that's part of my challenges with the CGPA. If you run afoul of of the law, then now you suddenly can't make verifiable statements. And I believe strongly that even criminals and even those in the opposition who are opposing the power structures should be able to make digital assertions. And part of how I see the sea change that's happening is we've got these wallets that enable proving access to a secret without revealing the secret, right? This is the magic of cryptography instead of username and passwords. So that enables a different form of trust in institutional processes. And we're figuring out, well, what does that let us do? And so some of this is catalyzed, right? Hey, this cryptography lets new things happen, and the wallet is needed for that cryptography. Some of this we could do in a completely centralized system, but then you're subject to the abuses of the regime or changes or hacks to the centralized party. So I think you pulled it back to the right question, which is is decentralized things or decentralized systems worth the effort?
yeah. Harrison?
I think they are, but it's a good debate.
Is it worth the effort? That is my question.
I think it's worth the effort. It's a dream that I think all of us here aspire to. But I think we should not kind of overemphasize. It's basically, if you're building a product at the end of the day, at least for the end users, the end users, we need to think about what's your core value proposition, right? And typically speaking, in most products I'm aware of, the core value proposition is not whether it's centralized or decentralized. I think it's a differentiator. I think it's your top three value prop, but that said, it shouldn't be your number one, right? For example, when you're in e-commerce, when you buy a thing, you're just trying to, your core value proposition is facilitate a transaction, right? Now, if you can do it through this decentralized to empower more ecosystem building as opposed to a platform, then I think that's a very, very good thing. But most users, they just want to get that thing, right? In the identity verification, the verifiers just want to know if this buyer is who they say they are, right? Are they going to be defrauded and lose money? And by the way, it's not just losing money, but it's actually the payment processors. If you have too much fraud, the payment processors will actually decrease your approval rate across the board. So it's actually not just losing money from the fraudsters; it's actually losing money across the board, right? So that's a very critical thing. That's what they care about, right? If you could do it through decentralized manner, so that there's more self-sovereignty, that's great. That's a differentiator. But the first and foremost value prop you need to solve is: can you tell me whether this is a real fraudster or not? Right?
And I still wonder about, is decentralized even the right word here? Because the issuer is still a central authority that we trust. Now, maybe the storage of that credential might be decentralized, so it could be presented in a disconnected environment, but it still sounds it doesn't sound decentralized to me. The question I always wonder is, what decentralized or what self-asserted claim is actually interesting to people? And I have trouble thinking of any. Like, I could say I'm an English speaker and you have no reason to doubt me. But other than that, what are these self-sovereign claims that I want to assert that are useful?
So I think there's an interesting misnomer here, which I think you are talking about. It's not distributed, but I do think it is decentralized, because decentralized means there are still points of centrality. The point of decentralization is that you can have many, many different centers. In the United States, we have 89,000 different jurisdictions that have the legal authority to use force to impose their will, right? These are counties, cities, states.
Yeah.
Every single one of them has the right to have their own independent way to identify you and think about you, engage with you. And so when we think about centralization, especially the US context, we think, oh, well, the federal government is the central behemoth. They're the big gorilla. But the reality is we have a complex. It's called a compound democracy. And each of these different entities need to be able to act on their own. So to me, I think of this question about decentralization. I'd look at the at least 100x value that was the difference between AT&T Mail and MCI Mail versus SMTP and POP. Like when we opened that up and made it a standard, and any company on the planet could run their own mail server, it changed the utility of mail by, I think, at least 2 orders of magnitude. Moving from the web, from AOL and CompuServe, meant we didn't have to ask AOL or CompuServe for permission. If you had a crazy idea, you could go try it.
Yeah.
And many of those crazy ideas, to Harrison's points, were excited about the web but didn't have a real business model, right? We saw the carcasses of many littered startups, so it just because it's decentralized or SSI doesn't solve the business question about how you make money, how you create value using it. But I think what many of us are striving for is, how do we unlock that 10x or 100x by taking something that's valuable, and we see it being valuable in Bitcoin, or we see it being valuable in sort of centralized credentials, and how do we get it to be 10x or 100x, that value proposition, by enabling anyone to create a credential that might be used in an interesting new way that we hadn't thought about before.
And also, I want to add, actually, in many ways, like it's already decentralized in regards to, like, for example, claims about a person. It's already kind of decentralized, like because DMV is not going to have a claim about your English speaking abilities, right?
Yeah.
And then whether you graduate from a real, like, let's say I graduated from Stanford, right? Whether that claim is true or not, that authority is different from the authority, or should I not call it authority? I would say the most popular market player, right, in validating the claims about your educational background is very, very different from the dominant market player. Actually, sorry, there's no dominant market player in verifying your work history today. There's actually none. Okay, so it's not just attribute by attribute. Every single attribute, every single claim, it's different markets at this moment, right? So it's in some ways already decentralized that way. Certain attributes, there are dominant market players, like for example, DOB. The most trusted authoritative claims is DMV and driver licenses. That is true. Okay, but in certain attributes like work history, there is no dominant. There's no trusted authority. So
Right.
that particular issuance market is actually at this moment is very, very decentralizing by definition, right?
So the answer maybe is by creating a sort of a renaissance of or I don't know maybe a genesis of credential issuing authorities. We're going to be able to fight disinformation, but it's going to be multi-layered. Um, so I don't know. It's. I think a conversation will probably have to continue. Um, let's move to last thoughts. Joe, what are your last thoughts before we break?
I'm actually thankful for this conversation. Often I'm engaged in these technical conversations, and that initial epistemological boundary about can we know truth, um, it really frustrates me with clients think we can know that, and I'm trying to get them to build systems that have guarantees that they can trust, and trying to create a guarantee that you can't trust is just a no-op. So when you're thinking about building these systems, um, I guess my takeaway is figure out what is your appetite for investing in resolving questions of truth, and invest as much as it's worth, and don't waste any time investing any more money than you need. And it might just be username and password with an email reset. That may work for you. Other systems you want to get to biometric analysis, but don't spend more time than you need, and it's based on your appetite.
Last thoughts, Harrison?
Yeah, I think this problem of truth, telling and discerning truth from misinformation, disinformation, is a very exciting one. And unfortunately, I don't think there's one solution that rules them all. And also, even if you build a solution, that solution might get outdated, and then you have to update that solution, right? So I think we have to take a very holistic approach and to solve this problem. And it's going to be a evolution. It's going to be a journey because I think the pursuit of truth, right? My belief is that truth is it's like infinity. It can never be reached, right? So the pursuit of truth, by definition, never ends. And I think we just have to have that patience and persistence to solve this problem because I do believe it is a problem worth solving.
Cool. Well, thank you for proposing this episode, Harrison. And quick reminder, follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn. Next episode, the Venn of Backs with David Broussard from Axiomatics. I have this new theory about TBAC, token-based access control. David doubts this. He doesn't think we need another back. And so he's a TBAC skeptic. We're going to have a conversation about that. With that, I will thank the guests and thank the audience, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.